Welcome to Regulate and Rewire, an anxiety and depression podcast where we discuss the things I wish someone would have taught me earlier in my healing journey. I'm your host, Amanda Armstrong, and I'll be sharing my steps, my missteps, client experiences, and tangible research-based tools to help you regulate your nervous system, rewire your mind, and reclaim your life. Thanks for being here. Now let's dive in. Today is episode 4 in our series on the different nervous system states. And today we are exploring shutdown, which is your nervous system's most protective response. It is that heavy, disconnected state where everything feels too hard, nothing seems to matter. We are completely collapsed, immobilized, and disconnected when we are fully and deeply in this dorsal vagal shutdown state. To help you get a snapshot of what this state experience might be like, or to help you identify really early in this episode if this is a familiar state for you, I want you to think about if you've ever had a feeling when you wake up that you just don't want to get out of bed, or it takes everything you have just to get out of bed. When you look at your to-do list and feel numb, you feel absolutely nothing, no motivation, no energy, no point. Maybe you feel like you are watching your life from the outside, like you are moving your day through a thick fog. Maybe you find yourself isolating, canceling plans, just sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. Maybe you've had those looping thoughts of what's the point? Or you feel like you are somehow just broken or lazy. There's oftentimes a shame story that comes here as well. These are common experiences in this shutdown state. It's when your nervous system says there's too much and there's no way out. And when it feels like this, it completely powers down to protect you. It is your body saying, I love you enough to turn the volume down on the intensity. So bring to mind this nervous system ladder that we've talked about so frequently. At the top is that green zone of regulation. Then in the middle, you have your yellow zone of activation. And at the bottom, you have this red shutdown state. Now you're standing at the top of that ladder holding a bucket. That bucket represents your nervous system's carrying capacity. When the stress load on your nervous system is light, you're able to stay at the top of the ladder, no problem. And as life, as stressors internally, physiologically, externally, relationally, add and add and add and add to that bucket, it pushes you further and further and further down that nervous system ladder. So when the stress load on your nervous system, when the stressors in your bucket have either gotten too many or too big, or they have lasted too long, our system has run out of capacity to carry. And that's what puts us in this shutdown state. So today we're going to explore that state. This is often where depression lives, or a lot of elements of depression lived. We'll talk about it from a nervous system perspective, why it happens, how to gently support yourself when you're in this state. And we'll also look at it through a parts work perspective. Because again, that is where a lot of shifting happens for our clients, understanding which parts of you might be in shutdown and how you can help to build a relationship with them and maybe walk them out of this hopeful, immobilized, disconnected place. What I want you to know up front is that we are not going to talk about fixing shutdown or snapping out of it. This episode is really focused on understanding it, working with it, creating the conditions for your system to slowly and safely come back online when it makes sense to do so, when it is ready to do so. So beginning where we've begun with all of these episodes, let's talk about what shutdown actually is, first from a nervous system perspective. So shutdown is governed by something called your dorsal vagal complex. This is the oldest part of your nervous system, and this is your body's most primitive survival response. And it's designed to help you survive when fight, flight, or even freeze are not options. So in the wild, this would be like playing dead. When a predator has cornered you, there's no way to escape. So your body essentially shuts down all non-essential functions to conserve energy, to wait for the threat to pass. What's also happening is that your body is releasing kind of numbing agents. So here it is basically deemed in the wild, escape isn't possible. Death is inevitable, most likely. So let's shut down all non-essential functions. Let's release numbing agents physiologically. Let's create some dissociation, some disconnection mentally, so that if death does actually come, it is as quick and painless and we are as disconnected from that experience as possible. And if by chance the threat does pass on its own, we have conserved enough energy to slowly begin to remobilize our system and move on with our lives. So physiologically, when you are shut down, your heart rate slows way, way down. Your breathing can become very shallow. Digestive system pretty much stops working. You might notice that you lose your appetite entirely or feel even nauseous at the thought of food. When we are in this shutdown state, we also have our immune system that gets suppressed. So this is why people in chronic shutdown often get sick more frequently or have chronic health conditions. There is so much research linking depression to increased rates and frequency of chronic illness. And maybe I'll actually do an entire podcast on that in the future. Things we see physiologically in this state as well is sometimes a drop in body temperature. So you might feel cold or need extra blankets. And even your vision can become more narrowed or blurry. You have a hard time visually focusing on things. These shifts is your body literally conserving every bit of energy for basic survival functions. That's what we're seeing, and that's what's happening here. And remember that your body doesn't know the difference. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between actual stressors, a tiger that has you pinned into a corner, versus the chronic stress load of life or unresolved, unprocessed, past traumatic experiences that have just weighed down your system for so long. This is a system that is worn down. Now, psychologically, what we often experience here feels like numbness, emptiness, disconnection from your emotions, disconnection from your body, your sense of self, from experiences around you, right? Dissociation, depersonalization are often part of this experience. It can be like, what did one of our clients say? I think she said it felt like there was like a thick wall between her and the world. Like she was watching her life from the outside, or like it was somebody else walking through her life. One of the things we often see here as well are senses of hopelessness or helplessness. Thoughts like, what's the point of even trying? Why does it even matter? I don't matter. You feel like nothing will change. Nothing you do will make a difference. Other common behaviors here are self-isolating, not returning calls, canceling plans, just feeling like you want to disappear. And sometimes it's not because you don't actually want to connect with other people, but it can be because social connection feels overwhelming or impossible when you are shut down, or it's hard to be around other people who are more energized or more positive than you when you find yourself in this state. And part of that is because there's a very real energy lack that we have here. Getting dressed can feel like climbing a mountain, making decisions can feel impossible, and even simple tasks can just feel so overwhelming. I also want to remind you that each and every one of these states has a spectrum. And so as I'm sharing some of this, some of you are very much like, yeah, that's my everyday experience. Others of you may be like, I have moments of this, but maybe that all sounds a little bit more intense. Does this apply to me? What I want to tell you is that we all have moments of shutdown, even me. And I say I'm on the other side of my struggle with anxiety and depression. I know what it takes to stay there. What that means is I don't get stuck in those states. But even I will wake up some days and I'm like, I am depleted. I am shut down, especially after having really emotional experiences the day before. So we all find ourselves in and within the spectrum of states and experience. And so what I want you to understand around shutdown is that what often gets labeled as depression definitely can include a shutdown component, but it often also includes elements of activation or freeze. So again, like everything, there is a spectrum. And this is why oftentimes our clients choose to replace their use of anxiety or depression with activation or shutdown. Instead of I have depression, it's I'm feeling really shut down right now. Instead of I struggle with anxiety, I experience a lot of activation. Because what that naturally brings into this experience is a greater element of context, a sense of choice, and a sense of this spectrum, that it might not always feel this awful or this intense. So offering just a brief summary of the shutdown state before I move on. Shutdown disconnects you from action, emotion, and oftentimes even parts of identity or sense of self. It's almost like the lights are on just enough to function. And this state is protective. It is not something that we ever consciously choose. When there has been too much for too long, when there is no solution in sight, when there are overwhelmingly more cues of danger than safety, of disconnection than connection, of depletion versus resource in your life, this is how your system wisely chooses to conserve energy, go quiet, and disconnect to survive. So in this state, your nervous system has two primary goals. Number one, to disconnect you, to prevent any further discomfort or harm. And number two, to immobilize you to conserve energy. And this is really important because if the survival mechanisms are disconnection and immobilization, then a little bit later in this conversation, when we talk about tools to help you slowly work your way out of this, what we are looking for to happen is gentle connection and gentle mobilization. But before we get there, let's talk about why some people find themselves in a chronic shutdown state. What causes this protective response to become a baseline, to become a pattern in somebody's life? And it, again, is also usually a combination of current contributors and past lived experiences. So some of the current contributors could be chronic overwhelm, stress, burnout, ongoing physical illness or pain. That internal stress load can be really high. Isolation, lack of social support, overstimulating environments, financial insecurity or instability, discrimination, genuinely, actually unsafe living conditions, unpredictable circumstances, parenting or caregiving without any support. So oftentimes shutdown happens after prolonged periods of stress or trauma, or just trying to keep up with demands that exceed your capacity. So again, slowly load is getting added and added and added to that bucket, pushing you further and further down. So this could happen after a period of intense work stress, caregiving responsibilities, again, dealing with illness, situations where you have been given more than you can sustain. Another thing that often contributes to the shutdown state is accumulated grief or loss. So when we are carrying around this buildup of grief, not just from major losses, but this could also be from so many small disappointments, unmet needs, dreams that didn't work out. Sometimes our system will shut down to protect us from feeling the full weight of everything that we've lost. Another thing that plays here is past contributors. So developmental trauma or neglect, emotional invalidation growing up, situations where no one came to help and you really needed it. This could come from living in systems that were visibly harmful or dangerous, repeated experiences of failure or helplessness. So when you have especially early life experiences of neglect, emotional unavailability from caregivers, situations where your needs were consistently unmet, your nervous system might have learned that shutdown was the safest response. Your nervous system learned that disconnection was necessary because it was the only thing that didn't continue to perpetuate this sense of harm. It's not hard to understand how in circumstances like this sense of disconnection was actually really beneficial to you. So shutdown often develops in people who learned that their needs were not going to be met. So they learned not to feel them at all. That disconnection, again, it was adaptive. And while it might not serve us long-term, we have to acknowledge and have compassion for the fact that it did probably serve us at one point. Which brings us to this conversation of understanding shutdown from a parts work perspective. It often involves the parts of you that are protecting you from further harm or disappointment. So again, the part that learned early on that hoping or wanting for things just led to disappointment. So shut down all your desires to keep you safe. Maybe it was a part of you that experienced emotional overwhelm and learned that numbness was safer than having these feelings because you didn't have the coping tools or mechanisms or the external support for those big feelings. There could be a part of you that was criticized or shamed for having needs. Again, shut down all your awareness of what you need. Don't ask, don't need. Maybe there was a part that witnessed so much pain or chaos that it just decided to disconnect because that sense of or literal being out of control was just too much. Or maybe coming back to that grief. I think in a lot of us, there's a part that carries enormous amounts of grief or maybe rage. And then what we need to still function in our everyday life is what we call sometimes a manager part that shuts down the part of you that has that grief or has that rage to keep you from feeling overwhelmed or from getting in trouble. These are not conscious decisions. They are protective adaptations that made sense at some point in your life. And the part of you that shuts down is actually trying to love and protect you in a way that it learned how, maybe in the only way that it knows how. Something I say often is that we are just bigger versions of tiny us's who had to come up with really creative ways to survive and get our needs met. And I think understanding this can bring so much compassion to this experience of shutdown, that it is not something that you are doing wrong. It is not a sign of brokenness. It is not necessarily this thing that you were born with that you cannot control. It is a part of you that learned to protect themselves by turning the volume down and disconnecting because life got to be too much. And so what do? This shifts us into the conversation of what can actually help us when we are in a shutdown state. And similar to freeze, what we do not need here, what our system cannot hold here, is more pressure and more stimulation. We enter this state because everything feels like too much. We're overwhelmed. So when moving through or supporting ourselves here, it is gentle presence. Very, very small steps back towards connection. So remember the two protective mechanisms of this state: disconnection and immobilization. And so when we are looking to resource ourselves in and eventually out of a shutdown state, what we are looking for are ways to gently invite in safe amounts of reconnection and mobilization. Not trying to force our system back online, push through the numbness. We are trying to create the safest possible conditions for your system to slowly remember that it is okay to be present. I remember one time in college, there was a friend of mine, and I had noticed that he wasn't really showing up to some classes. He wasn't showing up to social engagements with his other fraternity brothers. And I, put on my savior complex, and I was like, I'm going to go see what is wrong and help him to feel better. And I went over and I cleaned his apartment for him, and we played music. And then I invited him to meet me at the gym later. And then he didn't show. And I was like, oh, what's up, man? And he sent me a message that has impacted me so deeply. And he very kindly, very compassionately shared, I can't thank you enough for reaching out when so many people haven't, for coming over and helping me clean. And it's also really hard for me to be around somebody who has as much happiness and energy as you do when I feel this way. Sorry for bailing on the gym. I just need to figure some things out right now. Whew. That was humbling. And I didn't understand then what I understand now, which was my system was pulling too hard at a system that was already overwhelmed to the point of shutdown. And what this particular individual discovered a year later was actually that he was dealing with Lyme disease and didn't know. And so a lot of his stressors were coming from internal stressors, was coming from a condition that he didn't know about, therefore he wasn't treating. And so there's also this extra layer of shame that he likely carried around, which is what's wrong with me? Why can't I just? Reiterating what I try to make clear each and every single time, even if you don't know why yet. Your symptoms make sense. They make sense given the unique combination of your past lived experiences and current life circumstances. Current life circumstances being society, internal physiological stressors, your underlying health, your sense of connection and belonging. And we end up in a shutdown state when all of that feels like too much. And so in trying to come out of that, there are a few categories of tools, of practices that I want to touch on. Number one can be gentle sensations and grounding. So when you're shut down, you're often disconnected from your body, from the present moment. So can you hold a warm cup of tea? Can you touch something with an interesting texture? Can you feel your feet on the floor or push your back against a chair? Notice the weight of your body. What we are trying to do here is just to create very gentle awareness without trying to force anything to be different. Can we just send a signal to our nervous system? Hey, we are here. And that gently, hopefully, invites a safe level of connection. Other practices, and I think this category of visual orientation and some kind of gentle movement is in all of these, but your eyes can be the gateway back to the present moment. When you are shut down, you might notice that your vision feels really flat or disconnected. So in these moments, gentle eye movements can signal safety back to your nervous system. Looking around the room, you don't have to find anything in particular. Again, what are we looking for? Tiny ways to connect and mobilize. Your eyes are a way to bring small mobilization into your system. So moving your eyes, gently turning your head from side to side, maybe blinking softly. And then when it comes to movement, start small. Wiggle your fingers. Roll your shoulders. A gentle stretch. Tiny movements remind your nervous system that you actually can move, that you are not totally and completely immobilized. Maybe you're swaying side to side. Small in this state is the only thing that feels safe and accessible. So just get up, go grab a glass of water. How can we just move in a small, safe way? Again, this category of sound to voice. So sound can be really powerful to reconnecting when you are in a shutdown state because it literally vibrates through your body. It reanimates your nervous system a little bit. One of the things that we experience in a shutdown state is that our facial expressions and the tone of our voice usually become pretty numb or flat. So how can you activate and stimulate your vagus nerve with a humming or a voo breath? Ooh. Or even just saying to yourself, I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm okay. Using your own voice to help you remember that you exist, that you're present, that this state or this moment or these sensations are temporary. Can we listen to slow, warm music rather than something overpowering and stimulating, which is probably what I did to my friend? And then one of the categories of tools or practices or resources for shutdown that I think is the most effective when we are shut down, if it is accessible and available to us, is co-regulation, is seeking out connection. Now, maybe that connection is with your sense of self. Maybe it's looking at a picture of a younger you, looking through a photo album of positive memories. But is there any access that you have to co-regulate with something or someone outside of you? If direct social interactions feel overwhelming, you can also have it be more of a symbolic connection. Can you text somebody that you feel safe with? You don't need to have a conversation. Just let someone know that you're thinking about them or you're struggling, you're not ready to talk about it, kind of reaching out. Do you have an animal or a plant that you can tend to? These are forms of connection that don't require complex social interactions. Maybe you watch a comforting movie or show, something that feels familiar and soothing rather than stimulating or intense. So be mindful of the media that you choose to consume when you're in this overwhelmed state. Looking at a photo of someone you love, or thinking about somebody with whom you care about. Maybe it's connecting to something bigger, whether that's nature or spirituality, God. Just this sense that you are part of something bigger than yourself can be a lifeline when you're in this state. This could even be looking out your window or sitting on your porch and just reminding yourself that you are not alone in the world, even though so often we feel that way in this state. And as you attempt some of these tools or these practices or to lean into these resources, remember, small. In shutdown, less really, really is more. And if you find yourself in a chronic place, this is where having a professional therapeutic relationship, something that is predictable, it is scheduled, that can be a really beautiful form of co-regulation and relational support when you find yourself in seasons of just too much. And something that you might be able to do on your own, but can be especially supported in those therapeutic relationships, is working with the shutdown response through a parts work lens. So when you are in shutdown, can you get curious about which parts of you have gone offline, what they might need? So maybe there's that part that's overwhelmed and needs rest. You might say to that part, I see how tired you are, and it is okay to rest. You don't have to do anything right now. Can you not just try to fix shutdown? I think so often we notice we're in a state and we're like, how do I get out? But what if you noticed you're in this state and you said, I give you permission to be here. I give you permission to be immobilized. I give you permission to be disconnected. I see that you're tired. I see that you need to rest. It's okay to do nothing right now. Or maybe you have that part that's protecting you from feeling too much. Again, we're not trying to change anything. Maybe you just turn to that part and you acknowledge it. Hey, thank you for protecting me from pain. Right now, it's okay to stay disconnected. Or maybe, hey part, right now, do you think it could be safe for us to feel just a little bit? Or maybe there's this part of you that is carrying this old belief that you are too much, or that you don't matter, that nothing matters. You might be able to turn to this younger part of you and say, hey, you matter to me. Your feelings and needs are important, and I'm so sorry that it didn't feel like that then. And perhaps the most important tool for working with shutdown is patience. Patience and compassion. Your system didn't go offline overnight, and it won't come back online overnight either. Working with a shutdown state often requires a slower timeline than other states, where activation might shift in minutes or hours. Shutdown might take days, weeks, or even longer to resolve and walk ourselves back up that nervous system ladder. And this doesn't mean that you are broken or doing something wrong. It means that your system is taking the time it needs to feel safe enough to be present again. And when we are talking about the deeper work, the more proactive or lifestyle changes that help prevent or get us to the other side of being chronically shut down, number one, we need to address the chronic stressors. What are the work demands, the relationship dynamics, the caregiving responsibilities, the general pace or pressure of your daily life that's just unsustainable? Another thing to look for is how to create safety and predictability. So shutdown often happens when life feels chaotic or unpredictable. What are the things that you can do to create more structure, more routine, more safety, less pressure in your daily life to prevent your system from feeling like it needs to go offline? This could be more consistent sleep, meal timing. Is there a calming space in your home? Do you have regular practices that help you to feel grounded and connected? And if not, what might that look like for you uniquely? And for many of us and the work that we support our clients in, it's really just taking that step back and saying, what got me there in the first place? What's contributing to keeping me stuck? That might look like getting comprehensive lab work done. Like for my friend, getting that diagnosis of Lyme and appropriate treatment, coming out of that shutdown state likely wouldn't have been possible for him without addressing the underlying physiological factors. I've talked about it many times here. For all of our one-on-one clients, we now include a really comprehensive blood work panel. And almost every single one of our clients who have done that has had a couple specific biomarkers, really low B or D or thyroid issues or hormones that looked like they were headed into perimenopause. Very, very clear underlying physiological stress load that when it is addressed might be the thing that gives your system just enough capacity to come back online, to feel safe enough. So if you are somebody who's in chronic shutdown, what does that equation look like for you? Do you know what past weight you're still carrying around? Have you assessed your current lived experiences? Do you just have too much pressure in areas of your life, too many things to do? What are the internal beliefs that you have about yourself or the world or your capacity, those internal parts? And do you know what the baseline of your health is? What are these underlying physiological stressors? Are you sleeping enough or consistently? Are you eating enough or consistently? Because if you are deficient, if you are depleted, you are at much higher risk of moving into a shutdown state and having a harder time to come out of that because you're under-resourced mentally, physically, in some way. And so as we wrap up, I want to come back and just reiterate, shutdown, depression, however, whatever you want to label this, is not something that you should be ashamed of. It's also not something you should just be able to push through. The number of times I've been on a discovery call was like, I was talking to my partner or my dad or my friend, and they're like, just push through. You have so much in your life to be grateful for. Like, I don't understand. No. When we reach this point, it's not a matter of mindset. There is physiology, there is psychology. This is not something to be ashamed of, and it is not something you should be able to just push through. And my favorite way of understanding this state is that it is my nervous system saying, I love you enough to turn down the volume, to disconnect you when life feels overwhelming, when it's too much. This state is protection. It is not pathology. And the path back from shutdown isn't through force or pressure. It is through gentleness, patience, connection, and creating the safest possible conditions for your system to slowly come back online. All right, here are the 3 takeaways from today's conversation. Number 1, shutdown is protection, not pathology. That, to me, warrants repeating. When everything feels too hard and nothing seems to matter, your nervous system is protecting you from the overwhelm. Can we, instead of fighting or judging, listen to what it's telling us about your life and your needs? Number 2, gentle presence is more powerful than forced productivity. In this shutdown state, your system needs safety and presence, safety and patience, not more pressure. What can that look like? Through some of the tools we talked about today: tiny sensations, micro movements, small connection. And number 3, address the overwhelm. Address the root cause. Get the support you need to discover the root cause instead of just addressing the symptoms. If shutdown is a pattern for you, this sense of overwhelm, it's often telling you that something really, really important about your life, your past experience, your internal dynamics is off. And it's that deeper work that's going to create sustainable support for your nervous system. All right, friend, that is it for today's conversation. As always, if this resonates with you, myself, my team, we would love to offer you a new way of healing. And until next week, when we talk about our final state in this series, regulation, I am sending so much hope and healing your way. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Regulate and Rewire podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review to help us get these powerful tools out to even more people who need them. And if you yourself are looking for more personalized support in applying what you've learned today, consider joining me inside Rise, my monthly mental health membership and nervous system healing space, or apply for our one-on-one anxiety and depression coaching program, Restore. I've shared a link for more information to both in the show notes. Again, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.